The first thing I saw that morning was a row of fresh gray pavers cutting straight across the side of my property like someone had taken a knife to my yard while I was asleep. The path had not been there the night before, but now it was perfectly lined with white gravel, plastic solar lights, and a little wooden sign that read, Community Garden Walkway. Except that strip was not community property. It was mine. 3 hydrangea bushes had been ripped out. One irrigation line was sliced open and dripping into the soil. Tire tracks crossed my grass. The flower bed edging had been pulled up and tossed behind my air conditioning unit like trash. Then Linda Whitmore stepped onto the path with a coffee cup in her hand and a smile that told me she already thought she had won. Linda was on the HOA architectural committee, but everyone knew what she really was. She measured mulch, complained about porch chairs, and treated every mailbox like a personal insult. When I told her she was standing on private property, she did not apologize. She said the HOA had approved a beautification improvement and that I should be grateful because my side yard finally looked useful. Useful? That word made my hands go cold. I told her no one had permission to build anything on my land. She told me not to touch the path because it was now a community feature. Then she warned me the HOA could fine me if I interfered with common access. By noon, a violation notice was taped to my front door. By the end of the week, Linda would be facing a demand letter for $98,500. And by the time the county finished measuring every inch of that path, the woman who told me to be grateful was begging the HOA board to keep her name out of the meeting minutes. But first, I looked up at the small black camera under my roofline. It had recorded everything. I bought that house 5 years after my divorce, 3 years after my mother passed, and 2 months after I finally admitted I was tired of living in apartments where every wall had someone else's noise behind it. It was not a mansion. It was not even the nicest house in Maple Ridge Estates. It was a one-story place with faded brick, a narrow porch, and a side yard most people would have ignored. But to me, it felt like the first thing in my adult life that was completely mine. I worked from home as a network technician. My days were quiet. I made coffee, let Buddy out, answered support tickets, fixed systems, and tried not to get involved in neighborhood politics. Buddy was 12, slow in the hips, and loyal in the way only old dogs are. He loved that side yard because the morning shade stayed there longer than anywhere else. That strip of land mattered to me more than anyone in the HOA understood. My mother had helped me plant hydrangeas there during the first spring after I moved in. She was already sick then, though she pretended she was just tired. She sat on an upside-down bucket and told me the flowers would make the house look less lonely. She was right. Every spring, those bushes came back with pale blue blooms. Every time I watered them, I could still hear her voice, telling me not to drown the roots. So when Linda later called it an underused strip, she was not just insulting my landscaping. She was reducing one of the few peaceful places I had left into a convenience for people who did not own it. I had never tried to be difficult with the HOA. I paid my dues on time. I kept my lawn trimmed. I replaced my mailbox when they changed the neighborhood standard. I even repainted my shutters the exact approved shade of dark green after Linda sent me a long email about visual inconsistency. Linda Whitmore was the loudest voice on the architectural committee. She measured mulch, complained about porch chairs, and spoke about property values like she had been personally hired to defend civilization. Before the walkway appeared, she had already complained about my hydrangeas twice. The first time, she said they looked too natural. The second time, she said the mulch color did not match the approved community tone. Then one afternoon, she stood on my sidewalk with a clipboard and said, "This area has potential if you would stop treating it like a private garden." I should have paid more attention to that sentence. At the time, I thought she was just being rude. I did not understand that in Linda's mind, my side yard had already become something she was entitled to redesign. And if you have ever dealt with an HOA or a neighbor who keeps testing your boundaries 1 inch at a time, share your story in the comments, because sometimes the first warning sign is not a bulldozer. Sometimes it is a person with a clipboard telling you your private property would look better if they controlled it. 2 weeks before the path appeared, I came home from the grocery store and saw Linda near the edge of my grass with a man in a contractor polo. He was pointing toward my side yard while she nodded like they were discussing measurements. When they noticed my truck, the man stepped back. Linda smiled and waved like nothing was wrong. I asked if there was a problem. She said, "Not at all, Michael. We're just exploring ways to improve neighborhood connectivity." I did not know it then, but that phrase was the beginning of the plan. And the worst part was not that she misunderstood where the property line was. The worst part was that she never cared enough to check. The morning after I found the walkway, I thought the worst part was already over. I was wrong. At 7:20, Buddy started barking at the side window. I walked over and saw a woman pushing a stroller down the new path, across my side yard, 3 feet from my living room window. I stepped outside and asked what she was doing. She pointed at the little wooden sign and said Linda had emailed the neighborhood about the new community garden walkway. That was when I realized Linda had not just damaged my property. She had invited the neighborhood to use it. I found the email under the HOA newsletter. The subject line said, "New beautification access now open." Linda wrote that the architectural committee had approved a pedestrian path along an underused side strip beside 1,847 Maple Ridge Lane to improve neighborhood connectivity. 1,847 Maple Ridge Lane was my address. By 9 a.m., 2 more neighbors had walked through. Buddy stood inside the window shaking while strangers passed close enough to see into my living room. I called Linda. She answered like she had been waiting for me. "Michael, this is exactly why the HOA had to step in. You keep acting like that strip is your personal garden." I told her it was my personal property. She sighed and said, "You don't own the look of this neighborhood." 20 minutes later, she arrived with 2 HOA board members and handed me a printed page labeled Architectural Improvement Approval. It had the HOA logo, her signature, and a vague description of a landscape enhancement near a side access corridor. There was no survey, no deed reference, no county permit, no easement document, no written consent from me. I told her authority over paint colors did not mean she could build a public path through my yard. Her smile disappeared. "If you remove or damage HOA-approved improvements," she said, "the board can assess the cost back to you." My irrigation line was still leaking. My grass had tire ruts. White gravel had spilled into the flower bed. The pavers ran over the low strip, where rainwater usually drained away from the house. But Linda acted like I was the problem. I asked, "Would you let me build a path through your yard if I thought it made the neighborhood look better?" One board member looked down at his shoes. Linda said, "That's different. My property does not interfere with community access." There it was. Not a misunderstanding. In Linda's mind, my land had become inconvenient to her plan, so my ownership mattered less than her vision. Before they left, Linda taped a notice to my front door. It fined me $500 for interfering with HOA improvement access. A fine for objecting after she built on my land. Then I noticed one sentence near the bottom of her email. Per my direction, the contractor began before sunrise to avoid disruption. She had ordered workers onto my property in the dark so I would not stop them. And she had put it in writing. That was the moment I stopped arguing. Not because I was scared of Linda. I stopped because I finally understood the fight she wanted. She wanted noise. She wanted emotion. She wanted me furious in my yard so she could turn my reaction into the story instead of her trespass. So I gave her nothing. I took the $500 notice off my front door, laid it on the kitchen table, and opened a folder on my laptop called Side Yard Trespass. First, I saved Linda's neighborhood email. I downloaded it, took screenshots, and highlighted the sentence that mattered most. Per my direction, the contractor began before sunrise to avoid disruption. Then I pulled the footage from the camera under my roof line. At 4:48 a.m., a white contractor truck rolled past my driveway. At 4:51, 2 men unloaded stacks of pavers. At 4:56, Linda walked into frame with a flashlight. She pointed directly at my hydrangeas. I watched one worker drag a shovel through the bed my mother had helped me plant. I watched another cut the irrigation line. I watched Linda look toward my dark windows, then gesture for them to keep going. I clipped the footage and labeled each file by time. Contractor arrival. Linda directing work. Hydrangeas removed. Irrigation line cut. Pavers installed. Then I photographed everything outside. The tire marks, the broken edging, the exposed roots, the dripping irrigation line, the sign that said Community Garden Walkway. I took wide shots and close-ups from every angle. After that, I found my closing documents. Deed. Title policy. Old survey. HOA bylaws. Plat map. All the paperwork that feels boring until someone decides your land belongs to them. The survey showed exactly what I already knew. The side yard was inside my parcel. Not common area. Not shared access. Not HOA maintenance property. There was one drainage easement near the edge, but it was only for county stormwater access. It did not let Linda or the HOA turn my land into a walking trail. The next morning, I called the county clerk and requested the newest plat map. Then I searched the permit database for my address, the HOA name, and the contractor name. Nothing. No walkway permit, no hardscape permit, no stormwater approval, no record that anyone had permission to alter that strip of land. So I hired a licensed surveyor. Linda saw the survey truck and stood across the street with her arms folded while orange stakes went into the ground. When the surveyor finished, he looked at the path and said, "This is not a minor encroachment." The written report confirmed it. 312 square feet of my land had been converted into an HOA walkway without permission. Now I had footage, emails, the deed, the survey, missing permit records, and a drainage easement they had disturbed. For the first time since I saw that path, I felt the power shift. Linda still thought this was about bullying me into silence. She had no idea I was building a file strong enough for the county, an attorney, and her own HOA board to turn against her. The survey report arrived in my inbox at 6:13 on a Friday evening. I opened it while that gray path sat outside my window like a dare. The first page looked harmless: parcel number, legal description, property corners, measurements. Then I scrolled to the diagram. The orange line marked my property boundary. The shaded area marked the walkway. Almost the entire thing sat inside my lot. Not a few inches. 312 square feet. Linda had not beautified the neighborhood. She had taken private land, paved it, named it, and invited people to walk through it. The next Monday, I took everything to a property attorney named Daniel Price. I expected him to say this would be expensive and probably not worth it. Instead, he read the survey, watched the camera clips, reviewed Linda's email, and leaned back. "She gave you the case in writing," he said. The HOA could regulate paint colors, fences, and visible exterior features, but it did not own my land. There was no pedestrian easement, no deed restriction, no signed permission from me, no county permit, no stormwater approval. And because the path crossed a drainage easement reserved for county access, Linda had created another problem. She had altered an area tied to stormwater management without approval. Daniel pointed to the sentence in her email. "Per my direction, the contractor began before sunrise to avoid disruption." That shows direction, intent, and awareness, he said. Then he calculated the demand: removing the walkway, restoring the soil, replacing the hydrangeas, repairing irrigation, paying surveyor fees, attorney fees, loss of use, drainage correction, and damages for unauthorized control of my land. The total was $98,500. At first, the number felt impossible, but Daniel said this was not about pretending a few pavers were worth that much. It was about every inch of land they had taken without permission. That afternoon, the demand letter went to Linda, the HOA board, the management company, and the contractor. It required them to remove the path, restore my property, cancel the $500 fine, preserve every email and invoice, and stop claiming access rights over my side yard. Linda replied less than 2 hours later. "You are trying to profit from a community improvement." Daniel told me not to answer. 3 days later, the county inspector called. "Mr. Harris," he said, "do not touch the path yet. We need to see it exactly as they built it." The county inspector arrived Thursday morning in a white truck with the county seal on the door. Behind him came a second vehicle from the stormwater division. That was the first moment Linda stopped smiling. She appeared at the sidewalk with a folder under one arm, dressed like she was coming to a board meeting instead of an inspection, but this time, the paperwork was mine. I handed the inspector the survey report, the deed, the permit search results, the photos, and a flash drive with the camera footage. He walked the path slowly, looked at the orange survey stakes, checked the drainage area, and took his own pictures. Then he asked Linda for the permit number. She said it was a minor beautification project. He asked again. She said the HOA Architectural Committee had approved it. The inspector looked at her and said, "Ma'am, I asked for the county permit." Linda did not have one. Then the stormwater officer pointed at the gravel edging and explained that the pavers had changed how water moved along that side of the house. What Linda called landscaping was now a drainage concern. Linda tried to say the HOA had authority over community appearance. The inspector pointed at the survey stakes. "This is private property," he said. and the county easement is not a pedestrian path. For the first time, Linda had no quick answer. Then the contractor arrived. The inspector asked for his work order, license information, and the name of the person who authorized the job. Linda immediately said the contractor should have verified the property line. The contractor stared at her, then pulled a folded paper from his clipboard. The work order had Linda's signature on it. Under the project description, it said, "Install garden walkway along Harris side yard before resident objection." Nobody spoke for a few seconds. That sentence said everything Linda had denied. She knew it was my side yard. She knew I would object, and she ordered the work done anyway. By the following week, the county had opened a code enforcement file. The HOA received notice to remove the walkway, restore the drainage area, and provide all approval records. At the HOA meeting, Linda called it a misunderstanding. So my attorney placed the survey on the table and read her own words from the email, the work order, and the violation notice. No shouting, no drama, just records. And records were the one thing Linda could not intimidate. The county notice came down the following Monday. The walkway had to be removed. The drainage area had to be restored. The HOA had to prove no one had access rights over my property. And my $500 violation was canceled without apology. Linda stopped walking past my house after that. She stopped posting cheerful updates in the HOA newsletter. For the first time since I had known her, the neighborhood got quiet around her name. 2 weeks later, the contractor came back, but this time the county inspector and my surveyor were there. Every paver came up. Every strip of edging was removed. The gravel was cleared by hand near the hydrangea bed. The soil was graded back to the original drainage slope. Watching that path disappear felt strange. I had hated it from the second I saw it, but seeing it torn out made me realize how close Linda had come to stealing part of my life and calling it community improvement. The HOA insurance carrier covered most of the restoration and legal costs. The contractor paid separately for the irrigation repair and replanting. Linda resigned from the architectural committee after residents learned the project had never been properly approved. I did not get a clean $98,500 check in the mail. Real life rarely works that neatly, but the demand letter forced them to treat every inch seriously. By the time removal, repairs, survey fees, attorney fees, drainage work, replacement plants, and settlement were counted, the cost came close enough that no one at the HOA joked about it. The board changed its approval rules too. No project could touch a homeowner's lot without a deed review, a current survey, written consent, and county permit verification. A month later, I planted new hydrangeas beside the ones that survived. Buddy lay in the shade while I worked, calm again, with no strangers passing by the window. And I understood something I wish I had learned sooner. I did not win because I yelled louder than Linda. I won because I stayed calm, saved the evidence, checked the records, read the deed, hired the right people, and let the facts stand exactly where the property line was. So if an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone else ever tries to turn your private property into a community convenience, document everything, keep every email, check every record, and if this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary homeowners who protect their boundaries the smart way.